what a wonderful thing to be up here on stage with Ann Hamilton and to help celebrate this really quite remarkable project, One Everyone. So I want to thank Andre for that very kind introduction. And you've all been watching an introductory video that tells you something about One Everyone, the photo portrait project that Anne has undertaken here at the Dell Medical Center as part of the Landmarks program. And we've been talking a lot among ourselves about one of the fundamental aspects of One Everyone, which I think you've probably gotten from the video, which is its really profound commitment to a democracy of process, to making art through, with, for, it doesn't sound like I'm writing the Gettysburg Address, but as part of an engagement.
We need to hear that again.
With communities. So one of the ways I thought to start, we might start talking about this is the very simple, how do you begin? What sets the process in motion?
Well, I think I begin first by trying to figure out where I am. And where I am or where we find ourselves has, everything to do with, like, what I'm reading in the paper, the social climate we all share. But more specifically for each project, each project sets a condition and makes an invitation. And I think it's understanding, like, what is here? And sometimes that's the architecture. It's where the architecture sits. I think that in many ways I feel like I don't have a form, but I find the form by responding to where I find myself. I think, sometimes it's maybe the people that are there, or it's the immediate social context and history that is in some ways in the architecture. But I feel like I lick my fingers and which way is the wind a little bit. It's because you're listening and you're trying to feel what is there but maybe not present to experience, and how is the work part of coaxing it into something that's shareable and social and visible in some way. And so it's very responsive, and it takes a long time, I think, to figure out, like, what is the question or what does this project need from me, or what is needed, or do I have the right question? And so that's a long process. And I think a really central part of it is, especially when I'm working for a really particular space, is to walk, like how do I walk this space into my body? Like, how do I have to know things from my feet up in some way. So there's the finger with the spit, and there's the feet, and I think the other part of it is to, in some ways, just be very blank, to arrive without expectation, to arrive without pictures or images about what I might do or find there. And then, And so, in this case, with Dell, it's, and we're just going to run these other things behind you for distraction. I think for Dell, it was because the architecture was being built, it wasn't something I could physically experience. And things were pretty far along in the design in terms of integrating into the space. So it was the program, and it was the people, and it was the inspiration of how Dell Medical School even came. It's here because of a public vote, and we talked a little bit about that for last night for those of you that were also at the event last night, but that I was incredibly inspired by learning about meeting Kirk Watson, and learning about Proposition 1, and that it was this giant weave by the community to become a wellness city and to place a research hospital that would rethink what the delivery and receiving of care might be. Like, that's so huge, at a time when I think what city is voting to increase their property taxes? That's something. So, and then when I met Clay and the team, that are involved in building this new program, it was, wow, such an honor to be part of this in some small way and to see some analogy between a process I might engage in and the processes of rethinking this whole huge system that they're engaged in. Yeah.
So, just to step back a few images, we've been looking at a number of both discrete object projects and installations that Anne has made since the middle 1980s that exemplify a number of things that come into what you've just said are the shaping impulses of everyone, and of course touch is the primary mode, the primary interface in everyone. The experience of touch is what creates the images in the sense, and I know many of you have heard this explanation already. The way these images come into being is that the subjects stand behind this screen, filter, blanket, screen, that is...
I'm going to tell everyone who that is, okay, just so you're not worried. That's Cora. Baby Cora is one of the stars. She's in a panel that is at the learning building. So Cora has permission to make whatever noise she needs to make.
And we welcome every sense, right? It's not just vision, it's touch. There was a slide on the screen a moment ago that was from the Cap Street project that involved animals in an area at the back of an installation. So there's been smell, there's been taste, there's been everything.
Poop.
There's been poop. It's important to
I think it's,
give a comprehensive.
There's been, peacock poop in a project. But relative to that, Nancy, we're pausing on this because these are images that I think in many ways are the antecedents to this project photographically. And so the membrane that we've described, and which there's a sample of in the gallery, and the condition that makes for exchange and the condition that makes for photography has everything to do with what these images look like, how they become what they are. And years ago, I started a project where I made small pinhole cameras to put in my mouth, and I was interested in how when you change, the one sense and you put it in another place in your body. So in this case, it's taking the mouth and making it an eye. So my mouth is the same shape as my eye, but it's much larger. And mine is, I think, very large, because I can put a pinhole camera in it. But to stand face to face with another person, to take a photograph, but not, again, have the camera visually present, because to stand face to face is very intimate. But the way I structured this is you're really just looking into each other's eyes. And so the duration is anywhere from 20 seconds to a minute. It's very long to stand with your mouth open in front of somebody. But the very awkwardness of that also allows this other thing to happen. And so the images that come from that look like this. And the mouth which frames it is also obviously the same shape as the eye. And I traveled around the country, or with projects, I had like a little Tupperware box, and I had it full of cameras that would be loaded with film, and I could do this wherever I was. It was like my portable thing when everything else was, very much site responsive or site related. And this is a picture of my son Emmett on the right, and he used to say, "Oh, Mom, I hate it when you do these weird things." And then pretty soon, I love to tell this story because then pretty soon it was like, "My mom, she takes pictures with her mouth." Special talent. Michael and Vanis, actually. That's Vanis, my father-in-law. I torture my family first. Meredith Monk, when we were working together. Another friend, John Simon. The landscape. But it's by opening one's mouth. Instead of to speak, it's like to image. And I think for me it's been a long process of figuring out what sound is going to come out. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that cross-wiring of two senses that happens with these pinhole images, the cross-wiring of auditory and visual experiences, something that comes up with everyone as well, the cross-wiring of vision and touch. It's interesting to me that you've been so involved with photography, which is usually, a medium of distancing in creating work that's about a variety of kinds of intimacy. And this is, Everyone is something of a departure in that it also really takes you into the digital realm in terms of the development of the website, which I know is in progress.
I think it's live now.
Is it live?
Jessica? I think it's live, yeah.
So this is sort of a question from left field. Do you feel that new technology pushes you in directions that are a different territory from where you began?
Yeah, it's like a tool, right? So, and it's here.
Yes, it is.
It's here. I think that we're always at this moment where we're straddling. I feel like, in some ways one foot is still back in the 17th century and one is, almost in the next. And that it's like we're between always analog and digital, and that at any moment the particular intersection of that makes certain kinds of things possible, whether that experiences or perceptions. And I'm really very aware that if we were doing all this with film, can you imagine? We couldn't do it. But it would be such a different thing. And so, some of the little gadgets that I've worked with, like the miniature cameras, and it's like a single chip digital camera, that what I love about it is that it can become like a pencil. And so the miniaturization of technology has allowed their relationship to the body to become very fluid, that then allows images or experiences to be made that wouldn't be possible otherwise. So, but it's such an intersection, I think, always of the analog and the digital. I feel very 19th century, I don't tweet and I don't have a Facebook page, and I can text. I just got my Bitmoji. But I'm learning, okay,
but you're not inhibited by the challenges of working with new technology. It's true that the Duraflex material, for instance, is a groovy new thing that was developed for very high-tech purposes.
Yeah, it's really an amazing material.
You make it look like.
But I think it's what artists do is use things in ways they aren't intended to be used, right? So it's always oh, this exists, but your application is often different. And so it's that, you have to see something or know about it in order to kind of pull it over into something else. And I think I mean, that's where, all the intersections of, science and art that I think there's a lot of support for, but it's very confusing for people how to set up the condition where some sort of real exchange can happen. And so, part of, like I talk about how the membrane makes a condition for this exchange. And so it's like, on an institutional level, how do you create a context where this crossing can happen that we're all very committed to and curious about, but you can't just put two people that are interesting in the room and think something's going to happen, right? So, I've always, this is straying a little bit from your question, but I've always felt that something can happen if you're working together. Like, so if you have a problem to solve, or like for me, I always need help. And I'm looking at some people in the audience that I'm like, I need help. Sure. And I think the needing help is also a way to sometimes work side by side. And sometimes that's maybe a very simple hand process, like laying the pennies on the ground with a lot of people. But, it's almost like an idea can be born because you're not trying to have an idea. And that seems very crucial, like it's like non-directional hiking. Yeah.
Well, the sort of each time the same and yet each time completely different experience of doing 500 odd subjects and 20,000 odd images have been produced as part of this project. And so you're developing a language of representation, but you're also using that language to say a whole variety of things. They're not. And there's also the range of modes in which they're going out into the world. So we've, some of you have already had the experience of seeing the porcelain panels, which are quite amazing. And another example of brand new technology and
very old, really old.
So, what is the process of this works, that works?
Oh, what's the process from one to the other?
I
was just going to say something about porcelain enamel. That I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and the White Castle buildings, the enamel buildings, I grew up around those. I don't know, maybe that was an early influence. I think, like every project, you bring everything with you, like all the weight of it and all those experiences, and then they sift through and come to bear on the place where you find yourself now. But I think one of the things I love is I love going to the flea market. I love going to the library. I love, like all of us, Google, we're searching all the time. But I think that what's interesting to me, like when I go to the flea market, is just the pattern of what I'm paying attention to, because that's changing all the time. So one of the things I talk to my students a lot about is how do you pay attention to what draws your attention? Because at any moment there's a lot of information in there, like it's mirroring back to you your interests or your questions that are not yet formed. But it's like the nose of your work is smarter than where you are. And so what are those things that tell you where you are before you know it? And so I think, I don't know, like these things that are seemingly serendipitous, intersections. Like I can remember being in a secondhand store in Los Angeles and coming across this beautifully wrapped paper package that I thought was a book, except that it was very heavy. And then when I untied the string and opened it up, I realized the paper was holding together a block of linotype, print type. And from that little find in the thrift store became a huge floor where I had to go to junkyards and find barrels of old linotype and borrow linotype from printers, and it immersed me in a whole, kind of economy. But it's like, it was sparked by that,
And it's striking that it was linotype, because print and books and every kind of print delivery have been another through line in your work, and a technology that's both very old and changing. The codex is a relatively old technology. The delivery of print is changing all the time. Do you want to talk a little bit about how not just print but also literature sifted through this project?
I think one of the things we talked about last night is that, like how the book is like our bodies. You know, the book has a right and a left, and it has a front and a back, and that it has this kind of symmetry that we have, and that so it works for our body really well, and it's portable. And you know, as we made the book for this project, we changed paper at one point, and there's something so satisfying about the like fall of the newsprint and the kind of particular weight it has in your hand, and the flexibility, and that even though you might not remark upon that, it has everything to do with your experience of it. And you know, I'm somebody who's reading increasingly like between books and screens. And I think a lot of us are going back and forth, like, I only want to carry 5 books on this trip, so I'm going to have the rest on my screen, or whatever. And I think for me, the reading is a landscape that makes permission for me for the work. And partly it's because what I find in my reading helps give me a vocabulary to begin to articulate what I don't understand yet. You know, and I'm stealing fragments constantly, or phrases, or just particular words. And again, it's like, oh, that word, I need that word now. And again, that's like finding the type in the junk store. So basically, it's just like you have your antenna up all the time, and you don't know why it strikes you, but that it does, it seems important to recognize and stop and pay attention to. So reading, I would say, is a huge part of my process. And in this project, for those of you that haven't seen the newspaper yet, I wanted one form of the project to be writing that gave you a way to consider some of the elements, some of the qualities that are in the work, the relationship of touch and gesture to, bye Cora. It's nighttime. And that was a very new thing for me to commission. You're really co-commissioned with Landscape, but 6 writers that I invited, and I knew everyone except Katie Stewart already before. And, but I was very nervous about, like, well, what is my role? Like, I'm commissioning this writing, and then when I get the first draft, then, you know, I'm responding, and how much do I push back, or if it was very interesting to become an editor, and, to read very, very carefully. So Brian, who spoke last night, who had to fly back this afternoon, I mean, there were 4 drafts with Brian, and we had coffee a lot, and we talked a lot. With Matthew Goolish, who's a writer, dramaturg, performer in Chicago, it was just this fully formed thing arrived, and it was packed tight, and it was like there wasn't anything to touch. So some of the commissions for the pieces, you know, there was a lot of conversation, and that was really interesting to me as a process. And then what I'm interested in is that because it's a newspaper and there are 10,000 of them, that they will be in the clinics and they'll be distributed in many places through the Dell campus. And now who knows where you're all going to take them home tonight too. But that the pieces are very independent of the project. They can live on their own. And I don't know where they're going to go. But I think for me it opens up, again, another way of working on each project. I'm supposed to be going through these, but it's really hard for me to do 2 things at once. like it's almost like each project, like a little thing starts in it, and then I can see it grow. So, like the first time we publicly took a lot of photographs with this material, this Duraflex Texan, we were photographing in public, and we sent everyone who was photographed a newsprint image of someone else. So in the mail, you got this ephemera print, but you didn't get yourself. You got somebody you didn't know. And I love the way that it was then crossing people. And I ran into someone later who said, oh, yeah, well, like, I put it on Facebook. And then my friend Ellen knew that that was Joe or whatever. And this other thing happened that was outside the project. And I think those ephemera, those newsprint things started wanting to do the phone book that we've finally been able to do here. And
which models a very old-fashioned form of interconnectivity and accessibility to, to information and to contact.
Mm-hmm.
It's, all these loops that have to do with reaching out and reconfiguring the social.
I think that there's so much, I think one of the questions for artists so much right now is circulation. And like what are existing needs or modalities for things to amplify, to extend, to circulate in the world. And there are those ones that are hand-to-hand and maybe face-to-face and tactile, and then there's obviously many, many others that are greater than that distance. And I think, how do we create those systems for intimacy and for contact? And how do we use existing ones maybe differently? Like, are there people here in the audience who actually have never sat on a phone book? I'm like looking at you, Maddie. Do you know what a phone book is? But it's like it is. And I think so often artists are, on the one hand, using things that are just passing out of currency, mm-hmm. and also trying to get hands on things that are very new. Yeah.
It goes back to Duchamp and his bottle rack.
Mm-hmm.
Not a current item when he first proposed it as a sculpture. I was struck by the way you talked about the process of essentially editing the contributors to the newsletter, because that kind of interaction is not that different from the way you directed people when they were standing behind the screen being photographed.
Right.
Do you experience it as the same kind of interaction, essentially?
I think it's like all of it is about responding. Mm-hmm. I think, and I think you used the words the other day about like you're being direct. Like I am, it's maybe my voice might not be really loud, but the directing is, as you said, insistent. Or is that the word you used?
Possibly.
Yeah. I was like, like I know Katie and I had back and forth about the word akimbo. Because she was interested in, or she was thinking about how, because of the near-far relationship to the screen, that it sort of dislocates a sense of maybe exactly where the elbow is or what part of the body's aligned. And I didn't think akimbo was the right word. I thought that was too extreme description. And it's those kind of conversations. So it's like the particularity of how you describe something, and those conversations are really fascinating to me.
And the way you're talking about it now is so visual. It's it's like reconfiguring the language so that it matches your vision, or reconfiguring how somebody is standing in relationship to the screen so that it brings out an image that you can see.
That you can see, yeah. And and also, there is a sense, I think, in these images of a kind of what I would call privacy. Michael, my husband, and I have had a long discussion about when I said a sense of the interior, and we had a lot of disagreements about that. Like, what does that, that you can't project that. But I do know, I think because I really do not encourage and discourage people from smiling, which is what usually the first thing you do when you stand in front of a camera is you smile, right? And I'm like, what? No smiling. And that's interesting because with the pinhole photographs in the mouth, it was too long to like all of a sudden you're standing in front of somebody who has their mouth open and you can't smile for a minute, like, and so immediately it like sets it into this other thing. And yeah, so, but, you know, all of these are also, I think, in some ways, conditions or excuses for some interaction to happen that I can't predetermine. I don't know exactly what it's going to be. Each person is very particular and very present in that moment in time. And my work is to be very present to that too. Even though kind of the same thing is happening.
Which is so characteristic of some of the more immersive installations. Yes,
here I'll get to the...
So, Habitus and Event of this one. So if any of you have had the good fortune to see these works that bring the public into contact and, you know, in essentially the same scale, but more focused. So you have to come to a place and participate. And of course, look at that lovely video. One of the things that characterizes Habitus in this installation of the drill hall is this involvement with textile, which has gone,
which is the membrane like cloth, it reveals and conceals. And I did a project in Seattle 2 years ago, and I was very much thinking about like and at the workshop in Philadelphia more recently, thinking about, you know, the cloth is the thing that is always touching us, that there are not so many moments in our life, maybe when we go skinny dipping or, you know, there are not so many moments where you are not in contact with cloth and you know, as we talked about touch relative to this project, and Brian talked about last night that Aristotle in the Anima, he begins with the sense of touch, which is common to all species, and it's the largest organ of the body. And but you know, it's also we also fear being touched, or it's also the source of contamination. And
it was an interesting observation that came up last night. Unexpected.
Yeah.
Of course, one of the things that's true of these installations is that they're sort of operated by the viewer. At the drill hall, those billowing cloths go up and down as participants sit on the swings and pump their legs. And in Philadelphia, there are rope handles that you could pull to make the...
Like bell ringing rope handles. I think they're at the end of this. But, you know, it's interesting because I think with the armory, like the one of the things that was really important to me is this thing we were talking about earlier, intimacy. So how do you take this enormous, huge space, it's the size of a block in New York City, maybe there's here, and then thinking about reading as being a very intimate thing. And I know I started with this question is, how can I read to New York City? And because when you do read out loud to someone, you know, often many of us have the memory of being next to our grandmothers or our parents and being read to, and there's a kind of, for me, there's so many pleasurable, sensual memories that are associated with that experience. And as a parent, then one of the great pleasures is to read to your child, you know, to like pause and take that time. Usually I would fall asleep, but, you know, then I thought, well, how can that be present in a public space, and what does that have to do with civic space, which is how I thought about this drill hall at the Armory. And so you have to find this kind of sideways in. So the thing about that system in this piece is that the swings were connected to hold the cloth up, and then the ropes continued across to the other side to the other swing. And so you could feel the weight almost through the system of the person on the other side, even though they were all the way across the space. And then the other form of that intimacy for me was that when I think I have some pictures here of the readers reading to the pigeons, is that when they're reading, this is their reading list right here. They have Darwin and Emerson and James. Anyway, the voice was transmitted into little radios that were in paper bags, and those paper bags were carried around. So, yes, we have iPhones and all that, but there was something about having the paper bag that rattled because of the air pressure in the radio, and that you were carrying the voice, and that voice could move around. So you could be very far away from the readers reading to the pigeons, where I worked with the city company actors and students. But even at that distance, you had this intimacy and this kind of vibration of the radio, in fact, because it was a low-watt radio broadcast, was something very comforting because the voice was actually touching you. Mm-hmm. And one day I was in there and there was a man on the bench on the side and he had the bag right here and he was just like holding the bag like a baby. And I thought that was really beautiful. You know, that it's like, it's had a tactility. The voice had a tactility, through this object.
Yeah. Powerful image. Speaking of carrying the voice out into the audience, maybe it's time to open it up to questions.
Yeah. I'd like to know, when did you start thinking of yourself as an artist?
I always made things. I grew up knitting and doing needlework with my grandmother, and her name was Lois Bennett. And one of the things about Lois is that she would knit and read to me at the same time. And so in my work, I think those things and that structuring of information, they've coexisted. And I don't think I even recognized that until, until the last 10 years. Like, oh, it all comes from Lois. But I think it's taken a long time for me to say I'm an artist. I think I've used a lot of other vocabularies, like I make things, I'm a maker, or I'm a teacher. And I think it's partly that, especially like I'm thinking about how I answer people when I'm on the plane. And you say, what do you do? And I don't usually say I'm an artist. Because it seems like there's immediately a picture in someone's head about what that is, usually, and when, it's like, oh, you're a painter, right? So I usually start kind of in another way. But I have been really, really lucky in the sense that I've been able to kind of do this my whole life. And to keep doing work and to find myself in situations where like I could do a project and then another project would come and another project would come. And, for that I feel incredibly fortunate and incredibly lucky because the work grows from making work. The work grows from being given a context that pushes you, that's hard. I've described that process sometimes as being almost like a dog circling, and trying to figure out where to sit. It's like, I can't tell you how much I walked in circles at the Armory before I could get it. And some architectures for me have just been impossible. I don't get them. I think that I've avoided naming things too much. Like, this role of naming is very complicated. And I know that for a long time I resisted, like I would never put capital letters on my titles because it felt like it was too emphatic. And then it would like contain and close something off. So It's only recently I've had a couple capital letters in the titles. But it's something about also, this is straying so far from your question, but I think it's about always wanting to do work that keeps the work in motion or keeps it in process. That's where I understand what it is. Like when you open a show, it's often the completion of a part of the process, but in fact, it's just beginning another part of it. And so I think my work has had live elements in many different ways, and that liveness is a way that the ongoing things that you're finding and you're coming to understand as you make a work continue into its public life. And I think that's been the motivation, because like the work is most alive when you really don't know quite what it is. And so it's always in this state of like becoming or being found. And so it's like, how do you find a form that allows you to sustain that? Yeah. Like I can just, the armory's up, it's like because of the timing of that, I was able to be there every day, because it was kind of between Thanksgiving and the first of the year. It was exhausting, but it was by being really present every day, I learned so much that I wouldn't have learned if I had like gone home. You know, said, okay, it's open, I'm going home now. And that I could change it, so. That was not your question, but that was interesting. Yeah.
For the Dell Medical piece here in Austin, from the photographs we've seen panels installed on the wall, how did you determine the adjacencies of each panel to the other?
We put lots and lots of we printed images, we worked on the computer. So there are 21,000 some files from all the shots. And I can tell you I've probably looked at every single one of those images at least 15 times. You know, and it's like and every time you look, you're sort of seeing something different because your lens has changed. And a lot of it was just knowing that we had a certain scale with these walls, knowing that the kilns are a certain size, that we can make panels that are 80 inches, and so the images would be the tall ones a little larger than life size. And then, what's the motion between the people? You know, so a lot of it's formal. It's like, what color clothing are people wearing? I want multiple ages? Does it feel like, it's a kind of composition? It moves, and yet there's like this individual kind of dignity and presence of each person. Jessica, where are you? Jessica Naples-Grilly, who Andre mentioned, has been through this process with me, every single image. And, you know, we talk about it a lot, but you have to print things out and actually experience them. Like, I don't know how architects make decisions about things that they can't actually walk in and feel, and like how you learn to anticipate what something will feel like that you have to decide on before you build it. So for me, actually printing these out full scale was a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like there.
How did you choose your subjects?
I didn't choose the subjects so much as we chose locations to work. So, one every one means that I could be doing this the rest of my life. But what we did was we wanted to set up several places on campus. And we first set up right outside the student union. And one of the first people who stopped was an undergraduate who was aspiring to apply to the first class at the Dell Medical School. And she's like, I'll do anything for you. I want to go to school so much, go to school in that program. And she's actually one of the covers of the book. There are 6 different covers. And then, so it was people signing up, volunteering, the landmarks crew all did an amazing job of also passing the word, and I know Andre called all her friends, and word passed, you know. Or someone would say, oh, this thing's going on over there. Go over. We went to the Contemporary Arts Center. We worked with Westminster Retirement. Oh, I see someone else. Hi. I keep seeing people that I photographed. I have the most beautiful images of you and your mother. Oh, there you are. Oh, it's so nice to see you. It was, every situation was really different. We were in community health clinics. We would go and set up. We had so much cooperation from the staff and the facilities where we kind of took over. And so people weren't so much selected as volunteered. Yeah. And what's been so great this last week is I'm walking around us and I'm like, oh, because I've been looking at these images very intently. And then one part that's really important is that there is this website. And so at least the images that we cleaned and edited and cropped for the book, all of those are available for everyone for download. And, it's another way that the work is can be given away. When these books, like whoever, maybe someday a kid is going to be sitting on a stack of these books having breakfast, but that's an important part of ascending the life of it. And then, it's interesting because I think what if I can't? I really wanted to actually go to some churches and photograph, because that's another, again, a place where people cross and gather who don't necessarily have anything in common relative to their work life. But yeah, the scheduling of that didn't happen. I also, have thought about, well, how would this be different if you were in the bus station or you were in the airport? But in terms of the collective group, it's, very small, really. 530 people is not so many relative to the population of Austin. But, it's, I guess, I don't know, it'd be interesting, what's a representative sample when they do polls, But, anyway, yeah.
So I'm wondering, when you were photographing, how much were you directing and how much were you conversing with your subjects in terms of, because they're all very different, what is being more transparent, what is being pulled away. And so in the videos, I see you talking to them, so I was wondering sort of what that dynamic was.
Do you want to answer that?
I can answer that because I was photographed, and when you're behind the screen, you can't see Anne. So it's there's a conversation that goes on, but it's a very oddly distanced conversation because you're really inside your own head when you're behind the screen, and I think that comes out in the photographs. Yeah.
So usually, I say, I'm going to have you stand here, and then I stand there so that you can see. And then I'm Jessica, how many times, or Andre, did you hear me say, press your eyebrow up against? Because there was a certain way that you could hold your body, that you did make contact. And then, I think my job my role was partly to keep people moving. So I learned that if I just kept talking, that also I think that has a way of putting people at ease, because it's I'm not asking you to perform back there. And also I really learned through an experiment where we did in Seattle that it is really important that it's me doing it. There is this way that, it's actually an exchange I have. And, that it's like touch, I'm touched by the exchange, and I think there's a reciprocal, I can say that's reciprocal in many cases, yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
How about two more? There's two hands there.
Thank you for this. It's very refreshing to hear you speak about your work, but I'm sort of curious what happens in the space between larger projects? So the experiences and the things that happen with this, what happens in the future, or are there small things that happen in between?
It's interesting because this project and working with this material was such a small side project in some ways for me. I was getting ready to open the armory, or working on the armory, and I was way like behind like schedule, or I didn't know what I was doing yet. I had just come from doing a project in Japan where I was living up in the mountains in this incredible place, like a community with 28 houses, and making a project in one of those empty houses, and kind of came back from that and went straight to the project that put this material in my hand, this collaboration with Bayer Material Sciences. And I remember thinking, like, I really don't have time for this. I really need to be focused on this other thing. And this small, what I would call a small project, has become this thing that's taking over my life. So sometimes the really small projects are the ones that actually seed change or seed opening up the vocabulary in some way. I think, in many ways I've had the longing to be a studio artist that I'm not. I have this fantasy. I'm going to come to the studio every day and I'm going to touch materials. But I'm mostly on the phone or on email, and I'm managing a lot. And so when I'm on site, that's like the reward. So like here, all the residencies and doing the shooting, that's live. That's very invigorating, and that's where the work is kind of happening. I haven't been very disciplined about having like small things that I do. Because so often you're kind of on to starting to do the research of like whatever the next thing is. Yeah. There was, I think, one more back there. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question here. You were talking about when you were, say, building a library.
Well, I would say that I try to put off making decisions as long as possible. Because I know when I'm not ready to make a decision, it's really a lot of work to try to do something that I don't know what I need to know yet. So at least I can recognize that part. And then, deadlines are really good because they prod the process. But I think it's like trusting the process will get you there. It's not always 100%, but it's like the making of the work is the coming to know. The making of the work is the coming to understand. The work becoming live is the coming to recognize the thing that you've made. And so often that isn't until it's like done. You don't even, when a large project like an installation kind of project opens, you kind of know what it is, but you don't even really know what it is yet. And so that's a big part of it. And then over time, it's also, even like when I lecture about the work, it's like coming to find how to talk about it is also the next part.
Without making.
Yeah, or finding the right words that feel like it leaves it open, but it actually gives you like a handle. I think I'm very interested in that. Like, I like having the handles, but I want it to be associative, that it's ongoing. And I think that, what I hope is that the work invites you into this kind of spaciousness of your own associative experience, and that you start in your own intersection with things, make your own connections. And it isn't like, it's always that question, like, what do you want people to get? And I'm like, I can't answer that. Because it isn't like that. It's also, I think, a process. I've had, and I think that frustrates a lot of people. And in other people, they're very willing to suspend into that, or to say to me years later, that, I experienced whatever, and that's just continued to haunt me, or be part of something that is, I know but don't quite know. And how do we make space for that in a culture that is really, really working very hard to pin things down? And what the work is trying to do is like keep everything open. That was a great question.
Well, being an artist myself, I put the grips with those conditions are there all the time.
Right.
And quite often I find that
like smarter than you are.
My understanding.
Yeah, it's almost like the work is smarter, and you have to catch up, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's true. And so, again, Andre started out talking about trust. And I think it's like that trust you have to have of your own work. Right? Yeah. So, should we go inside?